Alright, so how's it going everyone? Today we're doing a little bit of a different video. As you can tell, we are sat at my desk, which is of course usually my background. And today, seeing as a lot of people have actually asked for this, I thought I'd take you through my full video editing process. So start to finish, I'm going to take you through pretty much every step I go through when editing these videos. I've got a nice fresh video with tons of footage right here. We can scroll through my footage bit. There's a lot, and while I have edited a little bit of it, most of the fun, interesting stuff is unedited. So yeah, let's get into it. First off, we are going to be talking equipment. So what technology I use to edit these videos, starting out with the computer. So as some of you may know, I personally do use a 2017 27-inch 5K iMac, and considering how middle of the road this thing is, it has been a super solid editing experience for the time I've owned it. Like, I've been using this machine for pretty much every video that I've made on this channel, and yeah, despite it not being the most powerful machine on the market, certainly nowadays, and of course, while I am trying to get one of the M1 MacBooks, I mean, for the time I've been using this thing has been solid. To accompany that, I have my Magic 468 custom mechanical keyboard. Man, I love this keyboard. It was actually out of circulation for like the longest time, and I couldn't get a PCB, but for some reason, they brought it back, and I'm so glad they did. Finally, and possibly the newest addition to my editing setup, although I have had these before, we have the Logitech MX Master. Now, come on. There we go. We have the Logitech MX Master. Now, this is, of course, a classic editing mouse. People have been using this thing to edit, like, ever since it came out. Even before that, I think it was the Logitech Precision, something like that. Regardless, though, this thing has been an editing staple for years, and seeing as it went on sale recently, finally decided to pick one up and upgrade from the Magic Mouse I've been using for, like, over a year, because I couldn't be bothered to buy another one. And finally, in terms of equipment, we have the editing software that I'm going to be using, which is Final Cut. Now, as some of you may know, I was in the past a Premiere user. I personally still do really like Premiere as an editing software. However, the problems that it's been giving me recently, just not worth it. And I found that Final Cut is pretty close, especially with some really good plugins. So I've been using it pretty much exclusively since the iPhone 12 review now, and it's been great. I find that with this trusty film convert plugin, I can get some really nice colors. I find that audio is actually better than it was on Premiere. And if I turn off background rendering, the files don't actually take up that much space. So yeah, Final Cut, solid choice. Anyway, now that that's said and done, let's get into the editing. Well, as we know, I have a very big brain, so I forgot to turn on my microphone and my screen recording for that entire section. Guess we're gonna roll with it. Let's get into the actual editing. So, the first thing I will always do when I'm editing my videos is I'll essentially go through all my rough A-roll sections and just chop out all of the mistakes as well as all of the dead air time. So I've already done this for the intro for the video that I previously posted. You may have seen. If not, it's up there. And so while I've already done that, I'm going to show you exactly what I do with this section here that I didn't quite finish yet. So if I start talking, that's essentially where the clip will begin. There we go. If I make a mistake, like I often do, I will essentially just go through and chop exactly the same way as I did when I'm starting the clip. Just there we go, where I stop talking and cut directly into the next line. Now, this is called a jump cut. It's a pretty common tool for making things flow nicely. It also helps speed up the pacing a little bit. It makes your videos just that little bit more interesting, and it keeps things flowing nicely. So we're just going to delete that. And I like to cut as tight as possible to these individual clips. However, some of you who are editing aficionados may realize this is going to cause a little bit of a pop in the audio. Like when we go from one clip to another, it's going to give this little like, it sounds like that, but it's much quieter. And to solve that, Final Cut finally added the feature that I've been wanting for years. They finally added a proper crossfade tool. So we select the clips where we want the crossfade to be. We hit Option T, and then we have a perfect crossfade, so we get a really nice smooth transition. You guys can't hear that, but I can. It was smooth. Now I'm going to take that off for now because I do them all in one lump at the end, and that way you get a really nice snappy neat cut without getting that interrupting audio. So yeah, if you want a nice quick, often interesting pace, using this technique can be very useful. Anyway, let's go edit the rest of this. So I have actually edited a fair chunk of this already. As you can see, I was testing out a color grade on this clip, which I decided not to use in the end. Anyway, let's get to some editing. Okay, so I've just finished rough cutting a section of this video, and so far it's looking pretty good. It's still very flat, still very ungraded, but the pacing is nice. And here we've got to a B story in the video. Now, I don't actually have a cinematic sequence to edit just yet. So what we're gonna do to show that this is a little B story is we're gonna do a jump cut series. Now, what this is, it's essentially a way of quite quickly cutting through a large number of events, and it is useful for showing that a considerable amount of time has passed without doing something like a time lapse. So what we're gonna do is we want essentially each clip to be no more than 2 seconds. Okay, this clip isn't even a second. So that's exactly what we want. We want a good even edit to show that time is passing, but we don't want it to be too jarring. Just gonna go through and cut where most appropriate, as I'm doing here. Now, this was actually shot on an iPhone, by the way. This was shot on my iPhone 12. Didn't really fancy taking this gigantic camera with me. Man, that really wasn't L. I didn't get my MacBook at all. Okay, so we got some dialogue here. So we're gonna ease back on the jump cut sequence, as well as clearly make sure that the B story actually gets in. Often when you're cutting really fast through a sequence of events, it can be easy for the story to actually get lost. So what we're doing here is we're going to go slightly slower, just so we can make sure that the story isn't lost. Okay, so I definitely screwed up the words MacBook there. Now, something that you can do in Final Cut, which is very helpful, is you just hit the N key and then this little thing pops up. So you leave yourself a marker, as they call it, but I use them as notes, and I leave myself a little reminder. So this is to subtitle MacBook. So when I am making the fine adjustments later on, I'll be able to easily tell what I need to do and be able to get it done quicker. And now back to the main edit. Now, I didn't actually have any footage from when I was actually inside the Apple store because my phone was away, but we have the conclusion of the B story here. Jump cut sequence done. So we've showed a nice little passing of time. In less than 30 seconds, we've got another story. I find that adding a little bit of personality to these vlogs can be enjoyable. So it's often fun to throw in a little B story like this. And yeah, that's a little tip for you there. It doesn't have to be a super smooth slow-mo B-roll sequence. It can just be a fun little jump cut story. Anyway, back to the rough cut. So this is a technique I use called select reeling, where you essentially just select the best clips without deleting anything, and then you go through afterwards and delete the ones you don't want. This may also include dead air time and things like that. And then after you've got the clips that you want, you just go through, select the ones you don't want, and delete. There you go. Now, this is a simple way of selecting the best take out of multiple, and especially when you're dealing with a lot of footage, this can be extremely helpful. And while I'm really not dealing with that much footage for this video, as somebody who probably repeats themselves like 6 times per line, yeah, there can be a lot of takes, and some of them are better than others. Anyway, I'm gonna go off camera, I'm gonna finish this, then we're gonna move on to the next, much more exciting step. Okay, so as you can see, we have pretty much the entire video roughly cut. Now, I have gone through and cleaned up some of the previous cuts we made, but for the most part, this is it now. So now I like to work on the intro of the video. Now here we're just gonna go with the basic Oi Bermuda soundtrack vlog intro, classic BubVisuals. And to do that, we're gonna bring over my Epidemic sound kit. Now, I actually have this folder pinned to my favorite spot so I can always easily access it. For this, it's all shot in 120 FPS, so if we scrub through, we got some nice, slow, smooth clips, and I shot this on a vintage lens as well, so you get some really awesome looking footage. And while it's certainly not the sharpest in the world, I'm just gonna go through and get a nice little cut, and of course, add some graphics. I personally like to cut to music. I tend not to rely too much on speed ramps. I do find they're occasionally useful, but for the most part, I just like to watch through and cut on the music. See, the great thing about shooting 120 FPS is shooting 1 second of footage literally gives you 5 seconds. So yeah, kind of handy. Okay, so we've got our nice little intro edited. This isn't actually too long, this one. Typically, I now duck my audio to -6 decibels because that's what I normalize my voiceover to. And to make that transition nice and smooth, I then add 2 keyframes and then drag this down to around -25 decibels. There we go. Simple as that. Next up, I'm going to do my cropping of my footage because I shoot everything in 16:9 and then I crop it to a 2:1 aspect ratio in post, because I found that most people actually do watch my videos on their phones, and seeing as most phones do have that 2:1 aspect ratio or similar nowadays, always best to optimize your videos. Up next, I think we're going to go for a basic color grade. So what I typically do is I grade on the adjustment layers, then I copy and paste the effects onto the clips themselves. I personally find that this keeps my timeline cleaner, and so I prefer to do it this way, but you can just leave the adjustment layers where there are. There is no perfect way to do this. I just personally prefer copying and pasting the effects from the adjustment layer to the clips themselves. So for this clip, we're going to use a custom LUT. Now, I actually already have a preset configured, which just helps speed up my video editing process 10 times. And so we're going to drag this on, which is the standard profile grade, which is a configuration of LUTs and sharpening, paste it onto our adjustment layer. Okay, so to my eyes, this still does look like it's lacking contrast and saturation, so we're going to actually close the media browser and then hit Command 7 and bring up our scopes. Now, this is a vector scope. We don't need that because we're not checking skin tones here. We're going to open up the waveforms because this is where we can see our colors. It is lacking in some contrast, so I'm going to open up the color wheels and then just add a little bit to the highlights. Also going to adjust our midtones, which is where most of the contrast is in an image I've found. And then what I like to do is I like to bring my shadows up a little bit. I find that this just creates a slightly less bleak, stark look. And as we can see, if we take a look in the scopes, I've actually got my shadows to sit at around 7 IRE. Now, still, this is lacking some saturation, so we're going to go ahead and add this in. And there we go. While this clip was kind of overexposed, I think this is a nice color grade. Moving on, we have something a little bit more fun. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use a plugin that I personally really like called Film Convert. So I typically like to get a little bit more stylistic with my cinematic sequences, and I find that Film Convert is a really good way of doing this, because occasionally, while it can be a little bit difficult to work with on skin tones, I'm not gonna lie, especially with the turnaround of these videos, it can be super fun to just not have to think about skin tones and just get really creative with the colors, especially for an intro like this. And there we go. I'm actually pretty satisfied with that color grade. Now, of course, the final step is adding some sharpness to this footage because this was shot on a very soft lens. So if we add probably 2 points of sharpness to this, that will lead us with a really nice look. And there we go. We got some gorgeous looking filmic colors and a really nice, fun intro. And now we can just go through and adjust these clips individually because some of these aren't going to be as well exposed as the others. So here we're going to have to lift up those shadows. It's always good to get the general look in the adjustment layer, then just adjust the individual clips. I mean, that's how I've been doing it for ages, and works fine for me. So all this time while I'm doing these fine adjustments, I am looking at my scopes, making sure I'm not clipping anything, and watching how that light level actually moves, because I don't want to be flattening my highlights or my shadows. That is not ideal at all. We want to preserve as much of that dynamic range as we possibly can, while still getting a really nice, crisp, nice looking image. Anyway, I am conscious of the time, so now we're going to skip ahead to the next section, which is, of course, adding any B-roll that we might need, as well as mixing down audio. So now we're going to focus on cutting the B-roll. Now, obviously, if this was a review, there would be a lot more B-roll. Okay, here we go. So if we scroll through my previous review timeline, we can see there is a significant amount of B-roll. So often when I'm working with these bigger projects, I do actually color code my clips. So these red ones are of the iPhone 12 footage, whereas these blue ones are of the iPhone SE and my face cam. So if we want to get super organized, I can enable audio lanes. So here we have dialogue, effect, music, and of course, ProRes audio. So this is a more complex timeline. As we can see, there is a lot more B-roll here and there is a lot more audio. But if I simply play you guys a little clip, we can see that all the audio is around about hanging around that -6 decibels mark. That is a good spot for your audio, and that's where I aim to get my audio. In terms of B-roll, obviously a lot of that's down to shooting and color grading. shading, which we've already covered. Well, not shooting, but shooting is an entirely different topic. Let me know, by the way, if you want to see that kind of video. I'd be glad to do that. But I tend to make sure that none of my clips are more than 4 seconds in length, because then it starts to get a little bit boring. In fact, most of my B-roll clips are around 2 to 3 seconds. So yeah, this is a more complex timeline, but for now, we're going to be heading back to my Favy Tech and adding the small amount of B-roll to that just to help cut it up a little bit. Okay, so I'm simply going through here and looking for points where I want to add a little bit of B-roll to show this walk, and it just helps move the talking points along. So as you can see, I'm scrubbing to where it just overlaps to kind of hide that cut. Not really trying to hide that cut, but it just helps them cut a little bit smoother. And finally, we're going to add some music. So we're going to do as we did before, we're going to head into the Epidemic Sound folder. I think we're going to go with Beyond the Horizon Loving Caliber. It's been a while since I used that one. So of course, we're going to drag this down to the point where it mixes with the audio levels. And now we're actually going to mix our audio. So it's similar to the way that we color graded. However, I already have a complete preset for this. Rode voiceover bank. I drag this. So as we can see here, we have 3 main effects in our voiceover bank. We have the EQ, which essentially just makes it sound nice and bright, as well as taking out some of those nasty frequencies that we don't really want to hear. It's actually kind of like color grading, adding contrast and saturation. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Next up, we have the compressor, which again, I've already configured. Essentially, these are all pretty subtle. I mean, I try to get my audio sounding good in camera, but here we essentially flatten the sound a little bit, then sort of expand it again to maintain the dynamic range while, of course, keeping it safe. It also makes it slightly louder. I could talk about compressors all day, but it's very boring. So finally, we have the limiter. No matter what I do, no matter how hard I like scream into my microphone, it's never going to peak. And of course, that is very important. How I'll use this is essentially I'll add this to all of my clips with dialogue, adjusting them when necessary. And that's about it. That's the process for editing one of these short form videos. Now, of course, as I said before, editing full reviews is, of course, a lot more complicated than that. It also takes significantly longer. I haven't actually finished editing this video. Probably going to spend the rest of the night doing that. If I recorded this whole thing, it would be like 6-7 hours long. But yeah, I hope this has been helpful all the same. Oh, and then of course I export it. I use these settings. All right, guys, so that's it for today. I hope this one's been helpful. Let me know, by the way, if you've got any editing tricks of your own. I always like reading your comments. As for now though, guys, as always, thank you for watching. Remember to like the video if you want to see more content like this, and smash that subscribe button. I'm done for now, and I will see you guys in the next one.